In 1964, France became the first Western country to establish diplomatic relations with the PRC. This year, President Macron's trip to China makes him the first president from Europe visiting since the 19th Party Congress. What's on his agenda while in China? Macron has showed an open and positive attitude to the Belt and Road Initiative and the possibility that France and China can cooperate. How does he view the initiative and what cooperation is likely? The French president is expected to be seeking ways to reduce France's trade deficit by gaining better access to Chinese markets. What exactly does he want, and will it be achieved during this visit? Like China, France has opposed Donald Trump's rejection of the Paris Climate Agreement. How are the two countries continuing their cooperation to improve the world's environment?
Gentlemen, welcome to our discussion here about this official visit by French President Emmanuel Macron. First of all, my question is very simple and perhaps human enough to understand the unique relationship between France, the Fifth Republic, and the PRC. What do you think of the agenda for his visit? The first stopover happens to be Xi'an, where he visited the clay figures, the warriors buried there thousands of years ago. Right. How important is it for a European leader to look at this part of Chinese history?
I think yes. It's not the first time for European leaders to visit Xi'an, because also, even this time, according to the official, attitude from France, think that to visit Xi'an is to show the appreciation from France to China, to Chinese civilization, and of course, at the same time, I think now. We can read some other sense from this visit to Xi'an.
By the way, former French President Jacques Chirac was an avid collector of Chinese antiques to show his deep love for Chinese culture.
Yes. But at this moment, I think another big sense for his visit to Xi'an is also, Xi'an is starting point for the ancient Silk Road. So I think it also shows a very, very active attitude from President Macron and France to Chinese, reality and the Chinese development.
Yes, indeed, this dimension of his visit to Xi'an does showcase the French respect for President Xi Jinping's advocacy for the Belt and Road Initiative, which actually started from Xi'an, as you correctly pointed out. Sebastian, what do you make of the issues on the agenda of your president here in Beijing?
There are lots of issues regarding economics. France wants a more balanced economic ties with China. There is a word, an important word in French media, is the word reciprocity. Emmanuel Macron wants to support reciprocity and more balanced ties about economics with China. And there are also some diplomatic issues as climate change, as DPRK, as the Middle East, and China and France. Macron thinks that the two countries both can try to solve this issue.
By the way, France and China are two permanent members of the UN Security Council. France is and has been the major power in continental Europe. Having said this, what do you make of the importance of a prioritizing visit to China at the beginning of 2018? It's the first of its kind for the French president since he took office.
As you know, China is a great country, an important partner for France. So it is very important for a French president to go to Beijing. And Emmanuel Macron said this morning in Xi'an, he expects to come to China every year. So it is very important. I think it's the first president to say he wants every year to come to China. China has been an important partner for France, especially regarding the climate change. France and China supported the Paris Agreement. So, as I told you, China is very important for France. And Emmanuel Macron wants to support as well the Road and Belt Initiative. And I think he wants to promote this initiative. And this initiative could be followed by the rest of Europe. So it is very important for Emmanuel Macron to be in China.
Well, it doesn't come as a surprise to the European leaders who want to keep a distance from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean by joining AIIB, for example. Having said this, There's no question about the ambition of this young French president, Emmanuel Macron. What do you think of the challenges lying ahead for this bilateral relationship? We are aware that in terms of political institutions, values, the French people look the other way around. And we often come under severe criticism from the French media. Do you think President Emmanuel Macron would somehow draw criticism on issues like human rights, Tibet? However, he is very practical. What do you think of the challenges lying ahead?
I think France, now with the European Union completely at the désarroi, with Germany now even cannot have a proper government, with Brexit on the other hand, I think France play a leading role these days in the European Union. And they must not only voice on the economic front, as Sebastian mentioned, but also on the political side. I think France must also kind of hold the flag for the European Union to raise different sensitive issues with the Chinese government.
What are the sensitive issues, Hong Jian?
Yeah, undoubtedly, we do have some divergences, differences, especially politically, and also even for this economic and trade issue, we do have some different ideas about it. For example, last September, President Macron had a very important speech in France to call a kind of protected Europe. So I think now for China and for some other partner of France and Europe, we need to understand what's the meaning of the protected Europe. What's the difference between the protected Europe and the protectionism? And of course, on the other hand, that I think now, because we do have a very different system, so now we are also face a bigger problem is how about the pressure from public opinion in France, and as we know now, not yet we have a very, very strong, civilian base for or support to these bilateral relations.
Economics is of course prioritized for this newly elected president in France. He got the mandate in his hand through the election, of course, to build a constructive relationship with major trading partners. China is the second biggest trading partner of France, and France the 8th biggest of China. However, France suffers a trade deficit. In this context, Sebastian, what do you think of the possibility that your president will take away a number of hefty contracts? For example, 100 Airbus jets. What about the other areas where China would, of course, buy more to balance the sheet?
The nuclear field, France and China team up in the UK to build a nuclear central. There are many fields like environment, like healthy, like smart cities. So French has the knowledge, China has the money, and Emmanuel Macron thinks the two countries can team up together and to try to solve the gap with this unbalanced economic ties.
And part of the campaign between the two sides is the establishment of an investment fund worth of 1 billion euros to support the investment and cooperation between small and medium-sized enterprises on both sides. Jingzhou, you've been involved with international arbitration. To what degree do you think this helps?
Every time there are some visits, we always focus on Airbus and some major contracts. Actually, France has a comprehensive manufacturing facilities and technologies. They focus on small and medium-sized enterprises. Also, France has not only environment and others, but also art of vivre, all the luxury products and many other hospitality, tourism. So I think in order to reduce the deficit, I think the French government and the Chinese government should work out some more comprehensive cooperations throughout different sectors, not only on the nuclear and aviation.
China plays the card of balancing the two sides of the Atlantic Ocean very well for years. For example, once the United States adopted a very critical, if not hostile policy to China, China would automatically turn to Europeans for the purchase of Airbus instead of a Boeing. This time around, 100 such Airbus jets. Do you think it's too much?
I don't think it's too much, because compared with previous deal between China and Europe, it's not so big deal. But I don't think that China will follow the game, just like you mentioned, that to make some balance between the United States and Europe, because I think now China
Excuse me, I may somehow disagree with you, because Europeans have for years joined China in voicing their support for the multilateral or multilateralism.
Yes.
Meaning to respect the world body of United Nations.
Yes.
UN Security Council instead of the unipolar world under the U.S. primacy.
Yes.
And it is in this context Europeans may share more with China on world issues.
Yes, I think that we can find out very interesting relations between China, United States, and Europe. Even they do have a kind of complicated gaming, as we know. But I think that undoubtedly China will try to keep a balance between other two big powers like Europe and the United States. But I don't think this deal, between Airbus and Boeing will be an average for China. Because I think that, as we know now, China also is developing its own big aircraft industry. So I think that, yes, but this, maybe at this moment it's important for President Macron, for Europe, to get the deal from China. But I don't think it's a kind of a sustainable deal for both two sides.
What do you think of my question on the issue of multilateralism, with Europeans taking side with China in many cases?
As you know, France wants to promote a more balanced foreign policy and support multilateralism like China. So I think France and China, they have many common fields, many things to share. Since the election of Donald Trump, the US is more and more close. But France wants to be more and more open to the world. France wants to talk to each country, even if we don't agree on all topics. This is the French foreign policy, and I think there are some common items with the Chinese politics.
Yeah, let me add this. U.S. and France are now both governed by two former businessmen. Only the French one is a little more sophisticated. So they are more, I would say, business-oriented and more try to understand another party's position. Talking about aviation, for example, in the 90s, we already worked for a possible project of a French Airbus project to manufacture aircraft in China. At that time, Boeing was not ready even to talk about the possibility of technology transfer. I think with France, you may easily get some technology transfer versus some, conservative U.S. companies. So in the nuclear area, it's the same. So I think quite some project can be done between China and France in order to reduce this deficit if China have a much easier market access. That's what the U.S. and France claimed for based on the reciprocity.
But I'm afraid that the French side has enough reasons to be worried about the prospects of Airbus. I'm not talking about Boeing. For one reason, if you look at the birth of a C919, it is designed to compete with the aviation industry in Western and developed countries. Do you think the production and delivery of C919 jet in the Chinese market aims to compete with Airbus and Boeing? And to what degree do you think we're going to dominate the Chinese market? no matter what?
Yes, firstly, I agree that there will be some competition in future between not only in this field, I mean the bigger aviation industry, and also in some other maybe more and more fields. We can find out more and more problem of the competition between China and Europe, between China and some other developed economy in future. But at the same time, I think that we can try find some new way to deal with this competition. For example, how could we try to manage all of this competition, or we can try to find out a way to build up more joint events. For example, just like what happened in the past, the French car industry and China. Now we got a very, very close, I mean, joint venture. So I don't think to keep to get all of the other Airbus, Boeing jet from Chinese market will be the way of China.
Let's look at the issue of security. I'm not talking about national security in military areas. For example, you spoke of technological transfers regarding the prospects of Airbus in the Chinese market. What do you think of the issue of protecting intellectual property rights? French and Germans have been concerned about violation of IPR, and in this area, the two sides have been hosting rounds and rounds of negotiations instead of opting for a confrontational approach. You are, a lawyer by profession. Are you confident that China is learning very quickly to not only respect IPR from our European competitors, but we need to protect our own IPR?
Yeah, in one hand, I think China needed to still improve their IP protection system in practice. In the law, we have a great law already, trademark, patent, everything else. But for the implementation, for have a more strict protection of foreign companies' IP right in China is something, we need to still improve our practice. On the other hand, the Chinese company now go more and more abroad. They should also try to be more careful for their IP right protection in the European country. That's, I think, the two-way business. Both countries' companies need to somehow be aware of IP issues in order to protect their very valuable assets.
Yeah.
Reportedly, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has delivered a warning to Chinese tourists who plan to travel to Syria and other parts of the Middle East, given the volatility of this region. That gives rise to my next question about the rise of terrorism in continental Europe. Sebastian, you came here and joined our discussion about terrorist attacks, in particularly the case of Charlie Hebdo, which came under very bloody terrorist attacks by the lone wolf attacks. So do you think safety is being improved and France is safer for Chinese tourists?
I would say France is getting more and more safe since Emmanuel Macron has become the French president. There were not major terrorist attack on the French soil. So I think France is safe, but we need to be very careful because terrorism can hit everywhere, every country at any time, and more closer cooperation between countries, between continents is important. So regarding the Chinese tourists in France, the French authorities take care of Chinese tourists. There are more and more policemen on the street. Chinese tourists have some dedicated shops in which they can buy some French products with Chinese tiger price. So I think the situation is getting better and better, but we have to be careful.
Jingzhou, do you think Chinese tourists who plan to visit France and other major markets in continental Europe have to figure out whether it is worthwhile to buy luxuries in Paris or to risk their life. I mean,
not their life, but they are...
Do you share the same feeling of being safe in France? What's your advice for the Chinese tourists?
Personally, I never get any problem on that front.
Because you can speak very good French.
Yeah,
you know where,
one of the
where
reasons.
it's safer.
Yeah, right. I think Chinese tourists, it was a target because they bring a lot of cash with them. Now with electronic payment system, even Alipay, a lot of places, they accept such kind of payment, which may reduce the cash carrying of Chinese tourism. So this is one thing. And the second thing is you should be careful not to show too much external sign of your wealth. You know, a lot of diamond, etc., may provoke some, thieves.
Robbery.
Yeah, robbers. So, on the other hand, French police need to enforce their activities. I think in the old days, the sanction of these thieves are not severe enough. So it's not dissuasive. So they get in prison for 1 day or 2, they get out. So you have to have a severe punishment so that will be deterrent for any, thieves.
You know, the Chinese tourists who visited Europe got the same common feeling that the European cops would come across more as an onlooker instead of undertaking proactive intervention with acts like thieves and robberies, because they got accustomed to such common practices by thieves who come from underdeveloped countries. Do you think this threatens to scare away Chinese tourists?
I think it's an impression. If you compare France and China, for Chinese tourists, of course, if you travel to France, you would think maybe the security is not that good because we don't have so many checkpoints, so many policemen on the street. The subway is not as checked as in Beijing, for instance, but it doesn't mean that the streets in Paris are not safe or the policemen are not efficient. Of course, there are some thieves, there are some problems, some issues, but...
Some other grievances from the Chinese tourists actually focus increasingly on a lack of online payment. It is pretty inconvenient for Chinese tourists to use their smartphones and online payment.
I agree.
That's why a video went viral on the internet with a French guy talking, positively about Tencent and its role of WeChat payment. But this is something missing from the European market. Do you think this will prevent more of the Chinese tourists?
I agree. Frankly speaking, when I go back to France, I feel like, my God, I only have my mobile, but I cannot buy anything because I'm used to pay with WeChat, with my mobile. So the mentality in France takes some time to
It takes time.
change.
Hun Jian, let's look at the foreign policy issues.
Yes.
It seems, despite the glow of solidarity concerning the Franco-German access in continental Europe, following Brexit in particular, President Emmanuel Macron seems to be keeping a distance from other European powers by inviting Putin to visit Paris. And that surprised President Trump and those who investigate the alleged Russian meddling with the American elections. What do you think of the unique agenda of President Macron in getting closer to Moscow despite the severity of the economic sanctions since Crimea?
I think that, yes, as we know that for President Macron, and he always regarded himself as a student of President de Gaulle. So which means that France tried to keep its very deep tradition to keep independent diplomacy or independent foreign policy. So even after he took the power in France, we can find that the first priority for him to deal with European issues and to try to get some more cooperation with Germany. And secondly, he tried to restart this kind of big power diplomacy and to keep France always has more visibility and credibility in international arena. So we can find that he had, I think, a good exchange with firstly President Putin and then President Trump, and at this moment in China, because I think that China, not only because of the very good opportunity for economic cooperation with France, and also for President Macron, China also was regarded as a very, very important role in this kind of big power diplomacy. So yes, I think that President Macron is ambitious, he's young, and we are looking forward to that he can try to find a new way to keep the the tradition of France as an independent power in the world.
Yes.
But on the other hand, with the EU, you're supposed to have a common foreign policy of the EU.
Is it easy to get?
It's very difficult.
No, not yet.
And Macron tried to, try to implement the Charles de Gaulle's, independent foreign policy. But I think they certainly have some comments from other EU member states as to how far we can go, how independent we can be from U.S., how pushy we can be with Putin, etc. So it's
however confident President Macron may come across for the rest of the world who follow your political process in France very closely, he got to get a mandate from his electorate. What do you think of his current approval rating domestically? He undertook very bold reforms to, for example, improve the taxation system, and that will definitely meet strong opposition from other political forces in the parliament.
Right now, French people are cautious about Emmanuel Macron, but most of French people are very enthusiastic because Emmanuel Macron is very young, he's very ambitious. He wants to bring some change in France, but also in Europe. He wants to make France great again on international stage. So French people are waiting for him to make some change. It doesn't mean that all French people support him, but it doesn't mean as well that French people don't support him.
Aside, Hong Jian, what do you think of his sophistication and political office experiences? I mean, in this particular area, he's pretty young, very much like what President Obama suffered in the early days of his Oval Office in the White House.
Yeah, but now it's earlier for us to get to conclusion for President Macron's policy and result. But I think that even now, especially now, it gives as we know, the fresh air to Europe, to France, because as I know that in the past several years, they got a very, very, bad environment in France and even for some other European countries. But I think now, even President Macron regarded as a symbol, I think it's necessary for France and for Europe. But of course, now I think that once there will be more opportunity, especially get some more active response from French society and also other European countries, I hope that there will be a more successful policy for President Macron.
President Macron has been given a red carpet ceremony by his Chinese counterpart, Mr. Xi Jinping, and we would wait to see what the deliverables would be after he finished the official visit, the first of its kind since he took office. I thank you very much for being with us. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.